Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into everything there is to know about XIVU or ARATH. But before I begin, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, let's jump straight into it. XIVU or ARATH, the god of war, formerly known as Zero, is a hive god and youngest sister to Savathun, the Witch Queen, and Oryx, the Taken King. Together with her two siblings, she was a progenitor of the contemporary hive species, and one of its chief gods, having made a pact with the worms of Fundament. She is driven to become the mightiest warrior in the universe, and her influence is present wherever armed conflict takes place. XIVU or ARATH was born Zero on the gas giant of Fundament, with her sisters Arash and Sathona. Her father was the Osmium King, the ruler of the Osmium court. She was a member of a short-lived proto-hive species called the Krill, whose original homeworld had crashed into the gas giant millions of years ago. As a young Krill, she was fascinated by her surroundings, attempting daring feats that would have killed lesser beings. She took 6 of the Stormjoy's bait stars because of this. Above all, she wanted to be a warrior, a knight like her father's warriors. When her father became mad and raved about the Sinigi and the helium drinkers invaded at the urging of Teox, Zero used her bait stars to help her sisters escape, and confronted Arash as they fled their home. Together with her sisters, she swore a blood oath on the mast of their ship, upon her left eye, to avenge their father and kill Teox. When they salvaged an ancient high-tech ship from the XIVU maelstrom, Zero wanted to sell it to raise an army and kill Teox immediately, but was convinced by Sathona that it was worthless. During their aimless journey at the behest of Sathona, who was guided by their father's worm familiar, Zero cleaned up the ship and attempted to take her sisters' minds off their task. Eventually, when Sathona fretted they would not be able to avenge their father, and Arash concluded that they would have to dive, Zero was initially afraid but understood. Zero warned them, however, that this is how the crew had died. But Sathona, urged on by the worm, agreed with Arash. The sisters took the needle into the deep. They finally reached a point where they could use the ship's sensors on the oceans. To their horror, they discovered that the synergy was real, and that Fundament's moons had already aligned. Just then, they were encountered by the Leviathan, a creature long spoken of in Krill myth. The Leviathan warned the sisters that they needed to turn back, or else would unleash disaster upon the universe, saying that they faced a choice between the light, which offered civilization, and the darkness, which offered only violence. However, the Leviathan offered no hope to the sisters to avoid the synergy. Sathona then revealed the worm's help to her sisters, and how it urged them to go down. Rejecting the Leviathan's warnings, the sisters dove into the core. Reaching the very center of Fundament, the 3 sisters found the worm gods Akka, Ir, Zol, and Yul. The worm gods offered the 3 sisters a chance for the Krill to escape Fundament, as well as to achieve immortality. All they had to do was take the worm's larvae into them as symbiotes and spread them among the Krill. The worms possessed the caveat that the sisters must never cease their natures. Zero must always test her strength, Sathona must always be cunning, and Arash must always try to understand. The sisters accepted the pact and became the first hive. Zero took the night morph and became XIVU or ARATH. Sathona took the mother morph and became Savathun, and Arash took the king morph, transforming into a male and becoming Oryx, the king of the hive, and eventually Oryx. As Oryx and his sisters forced an ultimatum on the remaining Krill to accept the worms or perish, turning them into the hive, Oryx turned his attention to Fundament's moons, and gave the Ammonites, there who had allied with the Traveler, and gave asylum to Teox. Initially, he was willing to negotiate with the Ammonites, but his sister Savathun, under pressure from the worms, killed Oryx as punishment. But rather than dying, Oryx's soul instead passed to his ascendant realm, or throne world, where his soul resided until he returned to the mortal realm. Rebuked, Oryx purged what sympathy and goodwill he had left, becoming a merciless tyrant. He and his sisters warred with one another on a regular basis after the defeat of the Ammonites as part of their worship of the sword logic, and their attempt to become the sharpest blades in the universe, heading to their ascendant realms when defeated. Their war of revenge against Teox had transformed into a campaign of genocide, when they slew the Ammonites and other interstellar civilizations to feed their worms. While Arrax and Savathun established courts to practice and study the sword logic, XIVU ARATH declined, declaring that her court would be everywhere war was found. During the war with the Akume, Arrax came to realize that the worm had deceived him and his sisters. Their worm's appetites were growing past their ability to feed with death. Meeting with his sisters in the Ascendant realm, surrounded by their servants, some of which despised them for showing weakness, they despaired over their dilemma. When his sisters offered their power to help Arrax find a way to save them, Arrax killed them, and used that power to confront his patron god Akka, the Worm of Secrets. He killed Akka so that he may steal its ability to call upon the deep, and then created the Tablets of Ruin, which gave him the power to take. His transformation complete, Arrax was now Oryx, the Taken King. During the subsequent war with the Akume, Oryx revived XIVU ARATH in an act of war, and revived Savathun in an act of cunning. He then decreed the Tith system. Each hive would kill their enemies, take some of their feed to their own worm, and tith the rest to their superior. Thralls would tith to acolytes, acolytes would tith to knights or wizards, the knights and wizards would tith to the Ascendant Hive, those who commanded legions of warriors and earned the right to enter the Hive God's Ascendant realms. All of this violence would eventually reach Oryx, Savathun, and XIVU ARATH, allowing their worms to feed on violence while continuing to invoke their inner natures. Following the Golden Amputation, Oryx declared to his sisters that the Hive had conquered its way to the edge of the deep, and that it had granted him a personal audience. As Oryx retreated into his throne world to commune with it, Savathun conspired with XIVU ARATH to strand him there and steal his Tablets of Ruin by cutting off the tribute flowing through his Tith system. They were ultimately unsuccessful. On returning, Oryx deceived XIVU ARATH and poisoned her own flow of tribute, so that she could never try to steal his tablets again. In the aftermath of this attempted betrayal, one of Oryx's daughters, Irhalak, visited XIVU ARATH's throne world and tested her death song there. All who heard it were irreversibly killed. XIVU ARATH complained about Irhalak's behavior to Oryx, who was greatly amused. After the Vex invaded Oryx's throne world, Savathun tipped XIVU ARATH off as to its location. XIVU ARATH planned an ambush, but Oryx, aware of his own vulnerability, evaded her by moving his throne into the Dreadnought. Following the war with the Harmony, Savathun decided that her fleets would enter the black hole that the Harmony lived around, claiming that she would become stronger for it, while XIVU ARATH took her fleets away from Oryx's, as she felt he constrained her too much. A year following the Red War, XIVU ARATH began committing some of her forces to the solar system, possibly in aid of her sister Savathun or for her own schemes. An ogre, Meager, spawn of XIVU, was imprisoned in the Prison of Elders and broke free during the Scorpion's jailbreak. A substantial force of Hive and Taken, apparently obedient to XIVU ARATH, also invaded the Dreaming City after its unsealing, pillaging it for awoken relics towards an unknown purpose. These forces were destroyed by the Guardian, and the relics returned to the Awoken. At some point, her sister Savathun had been secretly working in her name to undermine the Cabal homeworld of Tabadal, corrupting Evocate General Arath into becoming a worshipper of XIVU ARATH. Driven by obsession over war, Arath undertook a hive ritual in the capital city to summon the god of war to their planet, which was accidentally completed when Catel, the Princess Imperial, slew Arath, providing the blood and sacrifice needed to open a portal for XIVU ARATH to come through with her armada of war moons and an army of Hive. As she invaded Tabadal, XIVU ARATH declared that the Cabal had been worshipping her for as long as they venerated war, and that she had finally come to claim her overdue tribute. Her forces overwhelmed the Cabal's defenses and drove Empress Catel to evacuate the remaining population to the remnants of her fleet and retreat to the Sol System. Following the second arrival of the Black Fleet in the Sol System and the sudden disappearance of Savathun from her court, XIVU ARATH began marshalling her forces into the system and making her influence even more overt. Her High Celebrant began spawning cryptoliths throughout the system, corrupting Hive, Fallen, and Cabal alike that came within range of them into Wrathborn subjects. Though XIVU ARATH's High Celebrant would be hunted down and killed by the Guardians, it was later on revealed that her Wrathborn were not only attacking the solar system, but also spread out across the galaxy. Most notably, the Cabal themselves had been under siege since the fall of their world. prompting the newly coronated Empress Cattle to propose an alliance with the last city to stand against the Hive god of war. Despite the gift Savathun had given her, XIVU ARATH has begun to actively hunt her sister, apparently at the behest of another, forcing the Witch Queen to go into hiding. Following Osiris's loss of his light, Savathun saved him from XIVU ARATH and began to adopt his form, knowing that XIVU ARATH would never expect to find her sister within the last city. XIVU ARATH would continue to hunt her sister regardless, but her efforts would distort the ascendant plane, which ultimately led her to corner the awoken queen Mara Sov, who was being escorted by her Tachyon coven. Though Mara managed to escape, XIVU ARATH captured her coven, taking them into her service. To save her people, the Dreaming City, and combat the Black Fleet, Mara Sov strikes a bargain with Savathun in exchange for excising her worm from her being. She would release Osiris. In addition, Mara Sov wishes to stabilize the Ascendant Plane with her rescued Tachyons using the ley lines, which would prevent XIVU ARATH from corrupting it to her advantage. Later on, she would task Kel'Garath, risen from bones, to steal an awoken artifact. Kel'Garath would attempt to do so, but the Guardian would get in there first, taking the relic and using it to kill Kel'Garath and the pillagers accompanying him. Despite the efforts of XIVU ARATH's horde, they failed to prevent the Guardians from saving Mara Sov's coven, as well as securing the ley lines back into the Awoken's hands. On the day of the ritual to excise Savathun's worm, XIVU ARATH, in a last-ditch effort to capture her sister, had her horde launch a massive assault on the Dreaming City and attempted to overwhelm the Blind Well. Despite being unsuccessful in preventing the realignment of the ley lines, this would allow the Hive army to travel through the Ascendant Plane and begin swarming the ritual spire, in which the exorcism was taking place, until they were once again pushed back by the Guardians. Desperate to capture Savathun, XIVU ARATH sent Kurutus, Kolix, and finally her champion Kel'Garath to stop the ritual, forcing their way into the spire. Regardless of her horde's forces and her champion's efforts, they ultimately failed and were defeated at the hands of the Lightbearers, allowing Mara Sov to successfully remove the Witch Queen's worm. Following her failure to prevent the exorcism and being unable to capture her sister, XIVU ARATH would have her forces lay low and gather their strength as the Guardians would handle the Witch Queen themselves, after she had resurfaced as a Lightbearer along with some of her followers in the Lucent Brood. Her forces would engage the Lucent Hive in defending the Scarlet Keep from being taken from them for a ritual to invade Earth, but would engage the Guardians and the Imperial Cabal who sought to prevent the Lucent ritual. However, after the Guardians defeated Savathun and learned the existence of XIVU ARATH's master, the Witness, forced back the Lucent Brood, dealt with a resurgence of nightmares on a returned Leviathan, and bested Aramis from claiming the relics of Nezarec as ordered by the Witness, XIVU ARATH and her forces would re-emerge and consolidate their power in preparation for the Witness's return. In addition, XIVU ARATH would be ordered by her master to punish Aramis for her failure by subsuming the majority of the House of Salvation into her Wrathborn. Some of the House's leaders were even slain and then raised to scorn. To prepare for the Black Fleet's return and weaken the denizens of the Sol System, XIVU ARATH and her Wrathborn sought to corrupt the Warsat network, which remained vulnerable ever since the Warmind Rasputin was left incapacitated by the Black Fleet's earlier arrival. With the aid of House Salvation splicers, the Wrathborn and XIVU ARATH's horde managed to gain access to some of Rasputin's defense systems, even gain entry into the Seraph Station, the main hub of the network. But the whole Warsat network remained out of reach. To gain full control over the Warmind's arsenal, XIVU ARATH directed her forces to seek out and subjugate one of the Warmind's creators, Clovis Bray, who existed as an AI within the exoscience labs on Europa. Her combined force of Wrathborn, Fallen, and Hive gained entry into the labs and nearly claimed Clovis, but the scientist would be rescued by the Guardians, as they sought him out to restore the Warmind. The Guardians would reluctantly work with the Bray Patriarch, who would direct them to seek out the submines, pieces of the Warmind that were separated from Rasputin in the event of damage. XIVU ARATH would have her forces guard these vaults from assaults, but the Guardian would instead infiltrate the vaults, slay their defenders, and claim the data they need. One defender was her most loyal and devoted warrior, Kel'Garath, returned once more despite his past failures, now made a Darkblade. After the Guardians gathered enough submind data for Rasputin to speak directly and reveal Clovis's deception, leading to him being cast out by his granddaughters, Marasov would begin to have suspicions on XIVU Arath's motives. Noting that the War God's armies are legion, yet using only her Wrathborn as token-level force, and she is more tactician than brute than originally believed, the Awoken Queen suspected that corrupting the Warmind's network may not be the end goal XIVU Arath is seeking. Remembering that XIVU Arath's worm feeds off of destruction and conflict, just as Savathun's worm fed off of guile and deceit, Mara would come to the conclusion that XIVU Arath's true plan is her wanting the Guardians to restore Rasputin, and have him use his vast arsenal to smite her Wrathborn, to not only feed her worm from the destruction that would follow, but also fuel a powerful ritual. A spell to open a portal over Earth large enough to send her armies through and overwhelm humanity. Just as she had accomplished on the Cabal's homeworld of Tabotl, Mara would bring this conclusion to the Vanguard Coalition, stating that to prevent XIVU Arath from achieving her goal, they must not restore the Warmind. Anna Bray, however, voices her objections, stating that Rasputin is more than a weapon, and that humanity needs him as an ally if they are to survive the witnesses coming. Mara then suggests that instead of a complete victory, they restore Rasputin as Anna wants, but he refrain from smiting the Wrathborn, denying XIVU Arath the requirements she needs for her ritual. The rest of the Coalition's leaders agree to the plan. Unfortunately for XIVU Arath, her aspirations for invading Earth would be for naught. Though Aramis finally managed to gain access to the Warsat network, activating the Warmind's abhorrent imperative, a protocol where the network would target the Traveler should the entity leave humanity, Rasputin sacrificed himself with his Aura Sacrifice Order to destroy the entire Warsat network. With her aspirations for a ritual ruined, XIVU Arath ordered her Wrathborn and Hive forces to pull back from the inner system, though her forces would continue to cling to Europa, forcing the Guardians to continue operations there. XIVU Arath's hunt for Asha following Titan's reappearance after having previously been taken by the Witness. A team of Guardians consisted of the Young Wolf, Commander Zavala, Saint 14, and Lord Saladin, landed on the rig in an attempt to reach Deputy Commander Sloan, who had broadcast a distress signal shortly after the moon reappeared. The team encountered Hive and Taken forces belonging to XIVU Arath, who directly addressed the Guardians telepathically through her battle song. She taunted Saint 14 in particular, remarking that Sagira had been a foe worthy of death while Osiris had not, driving the Titan into rage. The Guardians succeeded in locating Sloan and learned of her predicament. The duty commander was particularly taken after Titan was claimed by the Witness, which allowed her to tune into the enemy's radio, but was afflicted by damning whispers, which almost led her to be claimed by XIVU Arath, but thanks to the creature Asha, Sloan was slaved and established a connection with her. Understanding that they share a foe in the Witness, the Guardians work with Sloan in helping her and strengthening her connection to Asha, thereby allowing her to decipher her messages. As the Guardians worked this, they clashed with XIVU Arath's Wrathborn, with the War God taunting them. However, as the Guardians learned about the Lucent Hive attempting to conduct a ritual to resurrect Oryx with the light, they found calcified fragments that recorded XIVU Arath's personal thoughts regarding the Hive's purpose in enacting the final shape, and her potent grief at the loss of her brother. Despite the efforts of her Hive and Taken, including Kelgarath and those who once served the Witch Queen, the Guardians managed to gain enough Igora Coral to help Sloan interpret Asha's messages, including one where she spoke of the Witness's origins. However, during one of the Guardians' deep dive missions, XIVU Arath sensed an opportunity to strike at Asha while the Guardian was distracted, conducting a ritual that struck Asha, forcing the worm to leave the safety of the arcologies to a ritual site in a vain attempt to disrupt the ritual, but ended up captured. XIVU Arath ordered the orchestrators of the ritual, 3 Screams of XIVU Arath, to begin the ritual where she will take Asha. The Coalition caught wind of this, and the combined efforts of Sloan, Saint 14, Saladin, and Zavala occupied her forces enough to allow the Guardian to reach the ritual site. Taking out each wizard and using the Drifter's machine to purify the Igori Coral not only disrupted the ritual, but each one wounded XIVU Arath herself. But the Hive War God would laugh following each wounding. Yet regardless of her Hive and Taken forces, XIVU Arath's ritual failed, allowing Asha to return safely, and deliver the last piece of her message, while her forces initiated a full retreat. The worm attempted to speak it through Sloane, but the deputy commander nearly became possessed by the Hive War God, who once again taunted her, but thanks to Zavala, Sloane was able to regain control over herself. With her connection clear, Asha spoke through Sloane and informed the Vanguard that while the path to the witness is obscured, one individual may know a way to follow. One Asha speaks as she who hides the truth in deception, Savathun herself. If the Vanguard wishes to follow and stop the witness, then they will have no other choice but to allow the Witch Queen to be revived. Following her failure to take Asha, XIVU ARATH communed with the witness upon the Dreadnought, who expressed its doubts as to XIVU's abilities, and nonetheless commanded her to prepare to fight against Savathun in the event the Vanguard chose to allow her resurrection. She would allow the Guardian an audience inside her temple, underneath Kraken Mare. With this invitation, she issued a challenge to them, to defeat a taken knight named Cole, the Executioner Knight, then a powerful tormentor in her service, Omen, Blade of the Black Terrace. After defeating the tormentor, she deems them worthy, awarding them the Wicked Implement, the use of which would allow them to not only tith to her, but become strong enough to face her directly. So, after weighing their options, Ikora and Eris believed that there was no other way to follow the witness, but to allow the Witch Queen to be revived and gain the information she possessed. Reaching out to Savathun's ghost Amaru, offering him the Witch Queen's body to be revived in exchange for the knowledge they seek, Amaru instead offers a bargain of his own, citing that Savathun anticipated that the Vanguard would need her. He will revive Savathun, but only after killing her sister XIVU ARATH for good, and will provide the aid necessary for it. Despite the terms, Ikora and Eris agree, but after journeying through Savathun's spire and hearing a recording from her stating that they cannot confront XIVU ARATH directly, for the Hive God of War cannot be defeated conventionally, for she feeds off of all conflict. Therefore, only a Hive God of equal strength can defeat XIVU ARATH, using the Hive's own sword logic. Understanding that the task now falls to her, Eris Morn volunteers herself to become a Hive, and with the Guardian as her acolyte, she would feed from the kills until she grows strong enough to challenge the Hive God of War. Though Ikora objects to this plan, fearing for Eris's well-being, she is convinced that there's no other way, for simply maintaining their current stalemate with XIVU ARATH is not feasible, nor can they outright battle with her. In either case, they will lose. After performing a ritual that turns Eris Morn into the Hive God of Vengeance, the Guardians begin slaying Hive and other creatures found within the Witch Queen's obulette, found beneath Savathun's spire as tiths to her, which allows Eris to grow in strength. However, XIVU ARATH became aware of Eris's ascension and welcomed it, even calling Eris her new sister, which Eris adamantly denies. Nonetheless, XIVU ARATH sends her forces to claim Savathun's spire, once viewing the sanctum as heresy, but came to the conclusion that even the light can adhere to the sword logic. But the Guardians managed to clear the spire of Savathun's forces. Further, the Guardians prevented the War God's forces from slaying the prisoners found in the altars of summoning, slaying them themselves as tiths to Eris. During all of this, XIVU ARATH continued to taunt Eris, goading her to give in to her new Hive nature and accept the sword logic as truth, even welcoming the upcoming challenge the two will have. But Eris remains steadfast against her words. With her hand forced, XIVU ARATH summons one of her most powerful warriors, the Leviathan Eater, the bane of the Ammonites, to face the Guardians, but the entity withdraws as it merely tested their capabilities, and it'll be back once XIVU ARATH's brood had been organized. After Eris prepared herself for the Guardian's final tith, she opened the way to the altar of the sword, where XIVU ARATH had her Leviathan-eating waiting. Though the God of War welcomed the challenge greatly, her favored champion ultimately fell to the Guardians, their tith strengthening Eris. However, what XIVU ARATH didn't expect was Eris Morn slaying a revived Savathun, gaining millennia worth of power as the Witch Queen hadn't been killed since the separation of her worm. Combining that power with the tiths the Guardians had collected, Eris Morn had become the most powerful Hive God, surpassing even XIVU ARATH. However, instead of challenging the Hive God of War directly, Eris Morn weaves a spell that banishes XIVU ARATH from her own throne world, rendering her mortal and vulnerable. With her spell finished, Eris collapses and eventually returns to her human form, but confirms to the Guardian that XIVU ARATH is furious at her defeat, and being severed from her throne world. She can't grow in strength from her tiths, which Ikora believes will make her more open to being challenged should XIVU ARATH appear. Savathun, meanwhile, found great amusement in her sister's predicament, enough to send XIVU ARATH a message taunting her, though the war god would not respond. Following her banishment from her own throne world, XIVU ARATH went into hiding, not taking part in the final battle between the Coalition and the Witness. Her hive forces, however, would still serve the Witness in combating the Guardians as they found a path to enter the Traveler's Pale Heart. After the Guardians found the weakness of the Witness, they would continue their efforts to heal the Traveler and locate any remaining lost ghosts. One of these missions involved finding and saving Akasha, a ghost that had been systematically scanning Awoken territory for years, and whose last known location was the Dreaming City. After finding Akasha, Marasov, Micah, and Crow would deduce from the movements across the ley lanes that as XIVU ARATH didn't join the Witness in its invasion of the Pale Heart, she was planning to turn the forces of the Black Fleet and the Coalition against each other to gain an advantage. XIVU ARATH would continue to move the hive forces from her broods through the Ascendant Plane en masse, while Mara was focused on holding back the final shape, and couldn't keep an eye on her city's ley lines, cutting her losses for her previous master, and gathering her strength for the war that would follow the war against the Witness. Another of these missions involved finding and saving Citrine, a ghost obsessed with Mormont hardware, and whose last known location was Mars. Here, the Guardian would traverse the unpredictable rifts that cursed the planet. Micah would detect XIVU ARATH's hive forces were sent back to the planet to investigate the time anomalies, and the team would confront and kill Kel'Garath, risen from bones, manifested from when he was trying to conquer the location, to prevent XIVU ARATH from retrieving any functional Warmind tech, while Mara would dispatch her Techions to seal the rift, even if temporarily. Though the Coalition rejoiced in the Witness's fall, they nonetheless understood that its death left a power vacuum, that some of its former servants are seeking to fill and continue to enact the final shape. They also hadn't forgotten that XIVU ARATH remained at large. Though she was mortal, the Hive God of War remained a threat that the Guardians would have to contend with in the future. Eris Morn inquired as to where XIVU and Savathun had fled after the final shape was prevented. So, compared to her siblings, XIVU ARATH is the least subtle, but the most bloodthirsty, boisterous and wrathful of the three. Nearly every time she speaks, it is in booming roars, ferocious growls, and screams of bloodlust, and is literally the embodiment of war. She relishes conflict and strife in all its forms. She is a master of siege warfare and an expert strategist, with her brood being far better organized and battle-hardened than even Oryx's hive. Even Savathun's ghost Amaru has admitted that XIVU ARATH is the Witness's best general. While her tactical abilities are exceptional, XIVU ARATH has often been shown to be simpler, easier to fool, and generally less intelligent than her siblings. While she was disguised as Osiris, Savathun stated that her sister lacked a sense of creativity and ambitions on her own. After observing that she was merely pushing through the cracks within the Dreaming City that the Witch Queen had previously left behind. However, it would be gravely foolish to underestimate XIVU ARATH. For what she lacks in subtlety, she makes up for in determination, cruelty, and ferocity. She has also proven very adept at emotional manipulation, most notably with Sloane after Titan was taken, mocking her and tempting her to give in to the violence. In XIVU ARATH's own words, she targets her enemies' weaknesses and infects them. Doing so leaves her opponents doubting themselves, or giving into rage which would fuel the conflict that feeds her and her worm. XIVU ARATH values persistence as much as she does strength, as she is empowered by the willingness of others to remain fighting. This is best exemplified by her continued support of Kel'Garath risen from bones, whom she continued to resurrect and propped up as a steady source of tith, despite his repeated defeats and deaths. XIVU ARATH continues to be a fanatical believer in the Hive's sword logic, even as her sister and various other lesser Hive have abandoned their beliefs and turned to heresy. When learning of Oryx's death and his slayer's refusal to assume his mantle as the Taken King, XIVU ARATH became utterly furious and hysterical, calling it blasphemy. She felt utter betrayal when she learned that Savathun had turned her back on the darkness and converted to the light. Eris Morn derisively stated that XIVU ARATH is desperate to prove the sword logic, in order to vindicate the Hive's efforts and prove the Traveler's path is a lie. Eris further describes XIVU desire for the sword logic's truth, of a world without doubt, pity, or grief, as being akin to a child's cry. Following her brother's death, XIVU outright asked herself whether or not her decision to take up the sword logic and side with the witness was all for nothing. To XIVU, as they were all virtually Hive, love and hate are essentially equivalent to concepts. Though she killed Oryx many times in the past, XIVU has nothing but glowing praise and affection for her brother, as seen in the memories found in the Ghosts of the Deep mission. XIVU sees him as a source of inspiration and guidance throughout their lives, as both Krill and Hive, calling him the navigator of her life. She was utterly furious after learning of his death and laments the doubt it left behind, audibly wailing when recounting his death, showing herself to be a sister in mourning. Her grief was such that she did not oppose the Lucent Hive as they sought to resurrect her brother in the light, a heretical violation of the sword logic, as it would bring her brother back after suffering a true death. XIVU's relationship with her sister Savathun is more complicated, as while the Witch Queen gifted her with the conquest of Tabottle, XIVU later relentlessly hunted her sister after learning of her intention to abandon the sword logic and betray the witness for the light, something that the war god found both heretical and infuriating. Savathun claimed that XIVU was actually hunting her out of fear of losing her, because separating herself from her worm would also render Savathun separated from her sister. Somewhat sadly, the Witch Queen admitted that however deeply she cared for XIVU, it wasn't enough to deter her from her chosen path. Nonetheless, despite the love that the sisters may have once had, XIVU remains angry with the Witch Queen's abandonment of their ways, leading the god of war to deface what Savathun once possessed and twist her former lieutenants into her servants. Zaven, the daughter of XIVU, is a taken knight, seen in the first part of the Oracle Engine mission. She, along with her siblings, were tasked with barring the way to the Oracle Engine from the Scorn, Awoken, and Guardians, which is where she'll meet her end by the Guardian. Assuming by name, she is one of several spawn of XIVU. Tyr Balak, the daughter of XIVU, is a taken knight seen in the first part of the Oracle Engine mission. She, along with her siblings, were tasked with barring a way into the Oracle Engine from the Scorn, Awoken, and Guardians, which is where she also meets her end by the Guardian, and is also a child of XIVU. And Rhaegar, the son of XIVU, is a taken knight seen in the first part of the same mission. He, along with his sisters, were tasked with the same mission to bar the way to the Oracle Engine from the Scorn, Awoken, and the Guardians. Skoroboth, the son of XIVU, was also a Hive Knight and the child of XIVU, the god of war. He commanded his mother's forces during the initial invasion of the Awoken's territory in the Ascendant Realm, but was imprisoned by his foes within a Hive fortress when they were unable to kill him. He is finally killed by the Guardian during the Shattered Realm, Ruins of Wrath mission. So what did you guys think of XIVU? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.